Welcome to JMBE Live. Today we're going to hear a discussion with our editor-in-chief, Stanley Maloy, and Carlos Goller, who's the senior editor of the curriculum section. We greatly thank you for coming today. And future JMBE Lives, we're going to take a break for April, but you can join us again in May, where we have two other exciting webinars in May on Fridays, and you can check our website to register for those. And there we're going to speak with some authors of recently published research articles. So let's get started with today's presentation. Stanley, come on stage.
Thanks very much, Rachel. Really glad to be here talking to y'all today. I thought what we could do is start off with just a brief introduction into what JMBE is and why JMBE exists. Rachel, could you show our JMBE slide real quick?
Yes.
So JMBE is really focused on education research that stems from microbiology largely, but that is influenced by so many other areas of science that feed into microbiology. By improving education research in chemistry and in physics and other areas, it also enhances the education process for microbiology. So we really are a broad home for microbiology, biology education, and all of the different areas that feed in to these disciplines. We're an open access journal, and so you can access any of the articles online for free. So it allows you to really readily keep up with all the new things that are happening in the field and hopefully implement those into your own practices while you're teaching at home. We focus on developing tried and tested curricula and cutting edge tips and tools that will enhance research in the biological sciences. We really care deeply about data-driven scholarly research assessment programs, tools, interventions in STEM education, really the whole area of discipline-based biology education research, where we can suggest changes to practices based on real things that we've tried, we've tested, we've assessed, and we know work in broad different situations. And we also have articles on perspectives related to educational opportunities and challenge that you might encounter, things that will help us as an education community always get better, always continually improve so that we can be more effective at doing what we want to do. I might say, if you're interested in these areas and you'd like to serve as a reviewer, we're always happy to welcome new reviewers into the JMBE family. And it's a great way to learn more about the field, learn things before they actually get published. It's a really good way to think about how to be a better writer yourself and how to design experiments so that they really will serve an important purpose here. So if you'd like to be a reviewer, the email at the very bottom, please send us a message and we'll get in touch with you and follow up. It's just jmbe@asmusa.org. So with that, Rachel, you can get rid of the slide now. We'll go back to in person. I'd like to introduce you to the senior editor of our curriculum section, Carlos Goller. Carlos is he's on the faculty at the North Carolina State University in the biological sciences. He's an associate teaching professor, and he's run a program that's involved in teaching and improving education in the area of biotechnology, as well as a number of other things. Carlos has broad interest in the microbiological sciences writ large, but his particular expertise is in education research, how we can do what we do much better. And he's thought about that a lot, both from the perspective of individual changes in the classroom and how that can impact the curriculum. Carlos, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stanley. I've really enjoyed learning from and having fun with JMBE. And as a reviewer, as an author, and now an editor, I get to learn from others about what they are doing in their classrooms, in their labs, in different environments, including the field. So I wanted to give you a brief quick overview of how curriculum articles can be really useful and are really useful to a broad range of educators, and how you can be and I hope to encourage you to be a JMBE curriculum author. So I'm going to share a couple of slides. Is that okay? Okay, so Mary Allen was a JMBE curriculum editor and taught me several things, and I continue learning from the JMBE experience and from what authors contribute. And I hope that with this set of slides, you get an idea for what curriculum articles are, why they are really unique and powerful, and how you can be a JMBE curriculum author. The goal for curriculum articles is to describe in enough detail research on lesson plans that can be readily implemented in a variety of classrooms and lab spaces. It's not just a physical classroom space, it's the lab, and the lab can be the bioinformatics lab, the wet lab, or field activities. So curriculum articles really describe innovative classroom and or lab activities. And if you focus on some statistics from a couple of years ago, submission outcomes in the curriculum section, you'll note that most articles eventually get published in JMBE, because I think we have a really supportive group of peer reviewers and editors that want everyone to benefit from the educational research that we are all doing. So accepted after one round of peer review with revisions, 37%, resubmit for review, 35%. There are some that are declined, but for the most part, it's a process that is aimed at improving these resources that educators are creating. And for this, we focus on the main components of curriculum articles. The goal is to create and share work that can be useful for potential instructors at different institutions. And this can be classroom or lab requirements that are easy to locate in the article, ready to use materials in the sense that these lesson plans can be taken by a new instructor and then adapted for their environment, descriptions of field testing, and the assessment that goes with it, demonstrating that these activities had the intended learning outcomes that were part of the learning objectives that came into the design of these resources. And if possible, descriptions of possible modifications. I love it when authors include additional resources for modifications to extend the lesson or to connect it to other curricula or other activities, including other activities published in JMBE. We also want curriculum articles to help potential instructors determine if the activity is useful for their needs. And for this, curriculum section articles have a couple of required or critical elements. This includes we want authors to describe the prerequisite student knowledge. This could be the academic level of students, the type of course that this lesson was implemented in, the subject matter that students were exposed to before doing this, that may be prerequisite knowledge, the estimated learning time. This could be how long this activity takes, how many sessions, or maybe it's a module, a series of activities. that spans a couple of weeks. We want measurable learning outcomes that are clear enough so that both students and instructors know what they will gain by participating in these activities. And often we want clear suggestions for measuring student learning. And this could be different ways of assessing and some metrics on how learning gains were measured. For this is a beautiful example from a publication, The Battle of the Bacteria. And table 1 of this article has learning objectives and the aligned assessment method. And in this case, we have 8 learning objectives, and the assessment methods you'll note include pre-post tests, self-assessments, worksheets, course exams, a self-assessment, so a variety of different types of assessments. And you'll note that there's a combination here of pre and post tests, self-reporting, as well as assessment of a worksheet or a course exam. Another example is on this slide. We have a figure from, again, this Cram et al. Article. And to make this curriculum article easier to implement in a variety of courses, it's useful to include a timeline of the experiments. So now that we've told potential readers, this is what students will learn, these are the objectives, these are the assessments that we use to evaluate student learning. Here is in figure 1 a nice timeline of how this lesson plan develops over the course of 4 weeks. In this case, this is the timeline for the 4 experiments in the gas module. So, curriculum articles really do provide all the necessary information for instructors and students. This includes ready-to-use lab or classroom materials, maybe the list of materials, handouts, lab reagents, the step-by-step directions for instructors. Generalized student handouts are often in the supplementary materials, and teaching resources, slide decks, digital slide presentations, exams, grading keys, and rubrics are really helpful. And that entire package is the strength of curriculum articles, because we have the entire set of resources an educator would need to get started doing your fantastic lesson. Field testing is important because this will help you demonstrate the effectiveness of your activities. And this is why assessment is a really important component of curriculum articles. We want curriculum articles to provide evidence that the activity helps students learn new skills and material. And I also appreciate when authors identify how the activity helps students and instructors uncover some misconceptions, for example. In curriculum articles, authors often describe prior use of this in the classroom or lab setting, prior use of similar activities, how they adapted for their specific setting, how they included assessment tools that may have been anything from a validated survey to having to create their own set of rubrics for this lesson, for example. And we want evidence of student learning provided often for each learning outcome. And this really helps make clear and evident the alignment between the stated learning objectives and the assessments. And again, examples of student learning may include pre-post testing, normalized learning gains, average scores based on rubric criteria, performance on exam questions, and skills achievement evaluations. So on this next slide, there's another example from a curriculum article. This is a lab activity demonstrating the antibacterial effects of extracts from 2 plant species, and it's Miller et al. We have the question number in a table. This is table 1, summarizing the pre and post lab activities and including the corresponding learning objective. So I'll pause here because this is a beautiful example of alignment of the items from the quiz with the learning objectives. And then this really provides a nice point for authors to include some of the data. How were these learning objectives met through performance on these questions? Here's another example showing data. We have the percent correct in the pre and post assessment. A p-value is noted, and the student learning objective that's being assessed is specifically mentioned for each of these questions. And here you'll note that the values include results from several semesters. And this doesn't specifically mean that you have to do your activity or your lesson multiple semesters, but it does emphasize the power of sharing the alignment of your student objectives, student learning objectives with the assessments that you're evaluating. So we have some really nice examples of how curriculum articles help us learn about the effectiveness of different activities. And the goal here is we want to share findings in a way that instructors can make modifications and learn from your experience and continue having positive impacts on students. So we want instructors who adopt curriculum activities to be fully prepared by your curriculum article text and figures and data and supplementary materials to be able to take those and run with those and do really fantastic and fun activities that have a positive impact on students. So I'll pause there, I think, Stanley, and save some time for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Carlos. I want to just come back and reiterate a couple of things that you said, because I think they're such important points that they're worth us discussing briefly. And one of them is that the idea is to give the instructor something that they can really take and run with. But you said also you love to see articles where people have modified it and moved forward. And I think that's part of the concept of thinking about education research. Every time you do an experiment, it suggests another experiment, some way you can make it even better than it is. And so that's part of the continuum of this process. And I think something that's really wonderful for us to see how a curriculum article like this will stimulate somebody to say, hey, we could also do this other, right? So that's a real important point here. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is really part of the culture of JMBE is that peer reviewers feel like the editors, we feel like we're there to help get the research published. We're not there to be an obstacle course and to reject as many papers as possible. We really want to see the good research published. And you emphasize that. And so I think that when you talk about the expected parts of these publications, are there some things that you could suggest that are really critical things for people to make sure that they've included and thought about thoroughly before submitting?
I think a couple of things that are on my checklist are usually, there may be a goal and clear, or I want there to be a goal for this activity or this curriculum. Then we drill down and get the specific objectives. If we're using student data, and often curriculum, I would say most curriculum articles need data. We need institutional review board approval or a statement or describing how you obtain permission to use data for research. And I would like authors to consider how this educational research fits in with previous attempts or previous resources and bring something new.
Very good. Thank you so much. I'm going to come back to this in a minute because I have a couple of other things to add to it, but we have some really good questions here. And one of the questions is, at the very beginning, I did a call for new reviewers, and Miriam asked if we are open to having a training program for reviewers, and that's definitely something we're really thinking about and trying to improve on. So that's a great suggestion, and it's something we hope we will be able to put together before too long here. The other thing that she pointed out is that sometimes it would be really useful if the person submitting a paper had an idea of the different stages of the submission process, right? So, Carlos, can you go through that from the time a paper shows up on your screen as the senior editor for the section and how it might proceed through?
I'll try, and Mike may correct me if I'm wrong, but we fantastic staff at ASM help Mike Lerman and Shelby receive submissions through the system. It gets assigned to a senior editor who reviews it to make sure it's appropriate for that section, because we have several different types of articles: tips and tools, perspectives, research, curriculum. As a curriculum editor, I look for specific items. For example, statement of IRB, learning objectives, assessment that is not only self-reflections, but usually supported by some other way of demonstrating learning. And then I read a little bit about, I read all articles that come in, and I try to pair it with an editor who is in that field or has an interest in that field. So after me, it goes to one of our fantastic editors. And from there, that editor sends it to reviewers, part of our family of JMBE reviewers. And it gets reviews from usually 3, sometimes more reviewers. We really appreciate the time that reviewers spend at reviewing JMBE articles. Once the reviews come in, the editor makes a recommendation. I get to see that recommendation and make some comments if necessary. And then the information goes back to the author.
Great. Well, Mike, do you have something to add to this?
No, I think you covered it perfectly, Carlos.
Wonderful. Well, Rachel, is there any chance we could pull up the submission page just to look at it together with the audience to help understand that first stage of submission?
Okay, like JMBEmsubmit.net?
Yes. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem. I'm ready.
Yeah. Now, so maybe it'd be, Carlos, if you could just real quickly take people through this process in a quick way. I know we could spend an hour talking about it, but just maybe quickly run people through this submission process and what they would need to do to just get the process kicked off.
Sure. And I actually just did this with a fantastic postdoctoral research scholar, and we went through the process, and the website is really nice now, the system. So if we start a submission after logging in, and we have links to checklists and short videos, do we want to attempt to start a submission, Rachel? Will you be able to do that? That's a good question. There's a preparing to
You
submit.
should be able to cancel it if you don't go very far.
So actually, this is in response to a really good question, but it might take us a little bit too much time for this session we have today. What I would suggest is maybe what we can do is put together a little tutorial that actually gives a demo for each step of this process. And we can post that tutorial. And that would help anyone who gets confused somewhere along the way. There's a lot of good information on the site right now, but maybe we can put something else together and make it available for anyone interested online. How's that sound?
And Mike can correct me, but I think some of the how to submit or submission process links have a really nice PDF with screenshots of the steps.
Absolutely. So we'll take a look at and see if we can simplify some more of these steps and try to make it really user friendly. But let me emphasize that if you're trying to submit something and you run into a problem along the way, send us an email and we'll try to help you. Okay. And that, again, if you send it to the email, just JMBE@asmusa.org, we will respond to you. Okay. So maybe we can move on from there to another question. And this next question is from Ida, and she asks if JMBE would accept submissions that have evaluated a course that ran for one semester. It hasn't been done for many semesters, and it's a medium class size. So the real crux of this question is it hasn't been repeated again in that context. And maybe there aren't enough students that you can get really robust statistics. What would you say about that, Carlos?
Oh, I would say we're in similar situations with classes that are capped by the size of the lab. And I would encourage you to go back to your objectives and go back to your assessments and consider, okay, maybe I won't have the numbers for some statistics, but there's rich qualitative research that you could do. Review student responses and start doing some coding. And you can get started, and maybe the next semester happens and you have 2 semesters of data. I would not see that as a barrier. I think it's an opportunity to start step by step and really dig deep into what those students who experienced your course learned.
Very good. And so Justin has asked whether for a curriculum article, if the materials themselves can be published elsewhere so that the article is really focused on that implementation and assessment, or does it have to be the whole entire complete package?
I'll say hi, Justin, and Justin always asks me tough questions. I would say yes, and I'm trying to think of an example, but I think there are a couple of examples that come to mind where the course description was actually published in course source, or some of the resources were published in course source, and then the authors focused on the assessment component and did a curriculum article. So yes.
Great. So Angela asked a question that I think it's a real good question, and because we've taken this term innovative and we've applied it so much to things like tech and biotech, and that we've lost sight of the original definition of innovative. So when we say it needs to be innovative, what we mean is it needs to be something new, something that's making you think a little different, something that it doesn't have to be totally brand new, but it's a tweak that's going to really have an impact, right? And so I think that that's really the criteria of expectation of innovation. And it's sad that this word has been usurped so much by biotech, because it applies in biotech, but it applies in so many other things we do in life as well. So, but then Angela also asked the question of how much experience is required of reviewers. Maybe that's something we can both give a perspective on, but why don't you start, Carlos?
I'll start with, I felt when I was first offered the opportunity to be a reviewer for JMBE, I thought I wasn't prepared to do it, and I felt really, can I do this? And then I think once you feel the climate of JMBE, the community that strives for improvement and learning, and there are really the system is easy to use. There's a clear set of instructions for reviewers. I think once you get over, at least in my case, my own hesitation to do it, you learn, and with every process, with every review, you learn something new. I was just in the back of my mind, I did a review for another journal, and I learned from that process that my perspective disagreed with the other reviewers, because you often get to see the other reviews. And now I've changed my mind. I'm like, yeah, that technique have passed those limitations, and that's going to impact my teaching of that technique. So I would say go for it. You'll learn.
So I'll just add to what you said, Carlos, and that is, we're all educators. We care deeply about education, about both teaching and learning, and view this process really as a learning exercise. I think I learned something from every paper I ever review, right? And so it's really great in that way. And the other part of it is, if you come across something that you're unsure of, that's what the editors are for, is to, help you through that process. So as a reviewer coming in, you can really learn and improve and get to be a better reviewer in the process of doing it. And I think at the same time, you can have a lot of fun and learn yourself. So, so don't hesitate because you don't think you have enough background. Right? So Monica asked a good question. She said, she asked, so based on what you just said, you can't publish curriculum ideas without data, but she's been a reviewer for microbrews at ASMQ. And a lot of times a microbrew is a cool idea, but doesn't have data yet to fully support it. And so she wondered if there might be a space for microbrew kinds of ideas in JMBE.
I think there is. And I'll mention that editors talk to each other, and if we receive a submission that may be a better fit for a tips and tools, because you're still working on assessment, yet it's a really, I won't use innovative, it's a really impactful practice or a tip that would help someone, then we may shift it over to tips and tools. And it has gone the other way too. Shared a research that this is a research article. So there are opportunities in JMBE for different types of studies and different ways of sharing educational research, because it's still educational research.
Absolutely. So Angela asked the question of, do we go to far-reaching subjects like food microbiology or atmospheric microbiology? The question is absolutely, right? We don't have to stay within our Earth's ecosystem. We can move way beyond it. And those are things that are really interesting for students and really great opportunities for teachers to attract a wider audience into microbiology. So for sure, that's very important. I have a hard time of thinking anything that microbiology touches that you couldn't somehow relate to JMBE. So, and Angela also said a very nice thing about the submission process, and thought it was very straightforward. So thanks so much for that, Angela. That really helps us think in terms of what we need to do. We won't break our backs trying to make the parts that are working already go again. Corliss asked a question about how do you deal with question and answer keys that are publicly available after an article is published, right? So, in other words, if you publish your answer key, you always have the worry that the students will get a hold of it and they'll use that to modify their answers in ways that haven't required them to understand the subject. That's another way of saying cheat. And what do you do about that?
I think it depends on the case. I'm trying to think if I can remember of cases where the instrument was shared but not the key. And I believe there are cases, especially for validated survey tools, that where in the supplemental materials, maybe some questions are shared, or maybe they are for review only. So I think there are opportunities to still, I'll say, share widely while still protecting the usability of questions. And I'm willing to say that the editors and the reviewers will work with you to make sure that's considered.
So we had another question was, will we deal with educational studies that relate to study abroad, things that involve microbiology but study abroad? And I'll answer that. The answer is absolutely yes, right? So that's an important educational experience that some students can take advantage of, and we consider it to be a core part of education, just like all of these other topics. So definitely would like to see more of those kinds of courses that could open our minds into different kinds of opportunities, right? So Musrat asked, sometimes people have less publications, but a deep knowledge and excellent approaches. What if those people want to become reviewers? So I'll just, again, follow up with what Carlos said earlier. And absolutely, I mean, if you have those experiences, then I think becoming a reviewer should be a learning experience for you too, and will potentially, we hope, help you publish more in these areas as you move forward, right? The one thing I have to say to keep in mind is that JMBE is focused on education research, right? So you can't judge a JMBE article like you would an article that you would publish in Journal Bacteriology that will focus on details of microbial genetics or something like that. They really are meant to deal with the education process and outcomes, right? So
I may add to that because of that and because of the context we're sharing this knowledge or engaging students, and you have to consider lab safety and feasibility and how can you do this at another place? And by this I mean generate the data or analyze the data or have groups of students experience that.
Okay. So Lorian asked this other question about the curriculum. It said, can a curriculum article be a description assessment of a whole new course, not a single part of a course, not a single lesson, but the whole course?
Absolutely. That's a course with objectives and assessments. That's a rich place to or a rich opportunity to share your research and your educational work and materials as a curriculum article.
So Lisa asked a really interesting question, and I want to make a couple statements before we get to her question, and that is, there are a couple of really important compliance issues whenever you're publishing in any field, including education. So one is, if you have to make sure if you're going to use student data that you have permission from Human Subjects Committee at your university. That is, if there's any way that data could be used to identify the individuals and it could be used by some other group for some purpose, the Human Subjects Committee will make sure that you have de-identifiers and you have ways of making sure that it can be used. So getting permission from Human Subjects Committees before you do an intensive project is really very important. The other part of her question had to do with biosafety, and biosafety is a really important issue. One of the things that we do when we review JMBE articles that might relate to biosafety is we have a biosafety group of editors that reviews them and provides input on that. And that evaluation is based on the ASM biosafety rules, which are available online. And I think that Rachel published them within the chat box, so you can see them. The question really gets down to, is it possible to do research that could be published in JMBE that deals with biosafety level 2 labs? And the answer to that question is that it is possible, but you have to be following all the biosafety level 2 criteria. And that includes the idea that you wouldn't be doing biosafety level 2 kinds of projects with students who are early in their careers and lack basic microbiological training, right? So we sometimes get submissions where somebody will be doing something that involves biosafety level 2 organisms in a beginning microbiology class. And that gets really a very tricky question because, as you know, biosafety depends on having the right kinds of equipment, but it also requires that you have the right level of knowledge to deal with the kinds of things you're dealing with. Overall, though, the ASM biosafety rules will give you a good input into that. If you want to publish something and you're not sure if it's appropriate, send us a message and we will pass that by our biosafety group, who will help do the evaluation. And so we are there to help. We are there to make sure if it's important and good that there's a way of getting it out. We're never going to be able to train people who do effective biosafety level 2 research if we don't have some level of training that provides that experience. So yes, it is.
I'll say reviewers have the opportunity to mention if they identify any safety concerns.
Absolutely. And again, following up on what Carlos just said, if the reviewers identify biosafety concerns, it will go to our biosafety group and they will do a full evaluation. And our biosafety group is first class. I have seen their discussions about some of these issues, and I think they really evaluate things in a thorough and very fair way. So Frederick asks the question, what about placing course source in the context of JMBE?
I think, and disclaimer here, I work with course source a little and I love what they do. It's also open access, and the goal, and based on the learning frameworks and professional societies coming up with learning objectives, and then the community working together to share materials. Course source is broader. There are more topics. There's professional skills. There's neuroscience, bioinformatics. The format of JMBE is a little different. Course source is a lesson plan, although there are other article types like science behind the lesson or an essay. But JMBE is, at least curriculum, the format is very different from the lesson format.
The second part of this question, Frederick, is what about CBE, LSE? And in fact, there's a lot of overlap between CBE, LSE, and JMBE, and many authors will publish in both of these journals. CBE is a kind of competitor, but we also think very highly of CBE. And so there is a lot of overlap. There is, there are some things that may be more appropriate for CBE, LSE than for JMBE. If you're publishing in microbiology, JMBE is a great place. A lot of microbiologists read it. And if you're publishing purely in cell biology, there might be a benefit for going to CBE, LSE. But so much of what we do, it has really broad impact. It's not restricted to people with a very narrow perspective. So I think we're running low on questions, but I think this has been an amazingly robust discussion. I really thank everyone in the audience for all of your questions. We basically hit on all of the topics I had jotted down and hoped we would cover before we got to this. So I think maybe it would be really good to reemphasize something I said at the very beginning, just in case we have any late arrivals. And that is that we really encourage people who are interested to consider becoming a reviewer for JMBE. And if you're interested in doing that, you can send any questions or request to jmbe@asmusa.edu, and we will we'll get back to you and respond. And we hope that you would be interested in doing it. I think it will enrich your life, and we love interacting with new reviewers, so it will enrich our lives too. Before we quit, I would just say that Michael Lerman really plays a key role in this process of getting the manuscripts through the initial process and up to us. And so, Michael, anything you would like to add as a final comment here?
As an ASM representative, I want to, I guess, echo your comment. I really appreciate all the conversation and questions and just engagement generally. I've taken down some of your comments. Like Stan said, we'll definitely discuss elements of the review process and getting feedback from you about ways forward and initiatives that our readers want. So definitely stay tuned. Thank you. And I hope definitely to see you all engaged as reviewers and authors for the journal. It's definitely through you all that we have a journal and we have that raison d'etre.
Thanks very much, Michael. And Rachel, why don't you come back on and show your face? And my last comment before I turn it back to you is that I hope all of you have seen that we really work as a team. we have a lot of mutual respect. We really have a common goal, and we are very thankful for the process of being able to interact with all of you and publish these papers that are going to help higher education be better. So back to you, Rachel.
That's the whole reason we're here, improve teaching and learning. So thank you so much. We had a fabulous audience today and so many great questions that really drove the conversation today. So we have no webinars for JMBE Live in April, but we have 2 of them in May. So go register yourself. Each webinar, you have to register individually. And we have fabulous speakers going to talk to us about their recently published research articles. And if you're new to education research, participating in JMBE Live is a great way to get your feet wet and see if this is something for you. Start to learn some of the methods, some of the quantitative, some of the qualitative methods, and some of the major considerations in the field. So do come back in May. And we do also have a huge library of videos on our YouTube playlist. And so I just put the link in the chat there. And we have over 25 videos now, all freely available and all discussing recently published research articles, curriculum, perspectives. So take a look whenever you have some time. And with that, I'll remind you that ASM, Conference for Undergraduate Educators, will be in person this year, November 17th to 19th in Phoenix. And we're working on the call for proposals. It'll be out later this month. So watch the website and watch your emails for the information. With that, thank you to the speakers. Thank you to Mike Lerman for joining us. And we'll see you in May. Take care, everybody.